Okay, so here we have a demonstration of the torpedo drill, and I'll explain a little bit about what it is, how it's executed, and how you should use it to integrating into your full stroke to make your swimming faster and more efficient. So here we have pushing off the wall, staying close to the surface of the water. We want to try and maximize that time in a good body position in relation to the surface of the water. Now, with this exercise, hands above your head, you can have them joined, crossed over like Chris has got here, or just by the sides, but you do want your hands above your head. One of the things that we've got going on here, which is not quite as I would like it, is where he's looking. Now we can see on here that he's looking pretty much straight down. I would prefer to see a more normal 45-degree angle of the head, so with the head position slightly higher. So actually we could imagine his head being sort of more up here and him then looking through at 45 degrees. That would be a more natural head position, and when you transition to full stroke, it will be a lot less movement and be a lot more effective. What we can see he's also doing, though, he's doing very well, is he's breathing out. We can see the bubbles coming out of the mouth and nose, just slowly controlling the exhalation as he goes through the exercise. Another couple of things that we're doing very nicely. Let's just come back a touch. So we've got another aim of this drill is to reinforce good body position and isolate just your kick. In order to create good body position, you need to have control over your core. You need to be able to activate that, engage things like your glutes and posterior chain, the muscles that run down the back essentially through your glutes, hamstrings, etc. So what we can see here is Chris has got nice core engagement. He's nice and close to the surface of the water. Yes, the arrow does work. Bum is pretty close to the surface of the water. Apparently it only works sometimes though. Bum is pretty close to the surface of the water, and we've got feet also fairly close to the surface of the water. What we're looking for in order to engage that core engagement is pulling your belly button towards your spine, and imagine you've got your pelvis is a bowl of water. Most people normally nowadays, we end up with it rotated a little bit forward. It's postural, it's standing up and sitting down a lot. We want to try and pull that back a little bit. So you're pulling that bowl up and leveling the front and the back of the pelvis off. You can imagine doing that by pulling your belly button in towards your spine. You should find that it sort of pulls across the muscles that attach to the front of your pelvis. Another way of imagining it is imagining somebody stood behind you with a couple of little bungee straps attached to the front top of your pelvis. Somebody's just giving them a little tug. It will pull them round, and what it will do is it will flatten out this lower back here, and it will enable you to engage your glutes a lot more effectively. If you can't engage your glutes because you're rolled forward, then you're not going to be able to get an effective kick, and the same applies also in things like running as well. So if that hip's rolled forward, you can't get an effective running stride. You end up with very short, and your hip flexors are limited. So with this, once you've obtained that position, then you're really looking to try and use the upswing of the kick, using the hamstrings and your glutes to bring your leg back up towards the surface of the water, up to that point there, and then a little bit of flexion in your knee. So at the top of the stroke, my arrows are really not working today. There we go. A little bit of flexion into the knee there, before then imagining you're trying to straighten that leg out now as you press down. And that leads me on to the second point that I would be slightly critical of in this, is there's a little bit too much movement from the knee. It's just come down a little bit too low for my liking. And we can see, or we can imagine, so we've got an angle here down to there, and then we've got the kick here. I would prefer to see that with a little bit less movement from the knee and then the leg coming through to there. It means that everything stays a little bit straighter. You're not engaging the hip flexors quite as much, and it is a slightly more effective kick, and we're not creating as much drag. So in the example we've got here with Chris, if we imagine a line along the bottom, you can't really change how deep his chest is, but anything that sticks out below that, in the sort of between that and the surface, is going to create additional drag. And at the moment we've got a little bit of additional drag kicking in here, and not quite as much pressure being applied downwards through all these parts as they could do. So imagine straightening that leg, but just allowing a little bit of flexion as it comes up to the surface of the water there, which is really nice. Now, another thing that Chris is doing very well is pointing his toes. it is completely pointless to move your legs if you don't point your toes. If your toes are pointing down, and when you can try the sea anchors drill, where you deliberately have your feet dorsiflexed, and sort of instead of your feet being flat like that, you basically point your feet down like that, and see what happens. I can tell you now, you'll go backwards because you're creating so much drag that it actually creates backward momentum. You're pulling water to the front of you. Now, most people don't swim like that normally, but if your feet are sort of pointed down like that and you're not flexing them, your toes are digging into the water, and all of that is just creating a lack of pressure on the water, which means you then don't have buoyancy to keep your feet up higher. You're not creating pressure or propulsion on it. You're actually creating negative drag, which means you're creating more work for yourself. So if you can't flex your toes, then you're creating a lot of extra work for yourself. So it'd be definitely worth having a look at some exercises in order to be able to get you to put your feet in this position here, this nice flat position, so it's an extension of your shin. Now, I hear runners all the time say, oh, my ankles are too stiff, it's all the running. It's not true. It might be true to an extent, but it's not true that they're not compatible. You don't need the flexible ankles of an Olympic swimmer, but you do need to be able to point your toes to be effective in your swimming. You will be amazed at the amount of difference that being able to point your toes can make, even if you don't kick very much. So even if your kick is minimal kick, you're just a light flutter kick at the back, if you're not pointing your toes, you're creating so much drag. Try it and see. It also explains why sometimes people who put pull buoys in when their kick is not particularly effective suddenly move a lot quicker. It's not necessarily because they become buoyant, although that could be part of it. It's because their feet now aren't creating such big holes and anchors in the water that they're going backwards. So point your toes and practice it. There's a few drills, few exercises you can do. Google it. There's plenty out there. It's not rocket science. Okay. Now, the last part I'm going to go on to on this is the transition between the drill and the full stroke. Now, we don't need, the object of the exercise is not to go all the way down the pool in torpedo position. Part of the exercise is the transition from the full stroke, from the drill into the full stroke. So you've got pushing off the wall on the surface of the water, engaging everything, get your kick activated, breathing out slowly, bring your arms in, and then once you've done 2 or 3 strokes, then take your breathing stroke. You should find also that as you go along, you might start off quite fast because your kick is still switched on and you're kicking away. And then as you get further along with using your arms, you can start to lessen your kick so that it comes down to a more normal, slower rhythm. Alternatively, you can do this exercise as really a hard part of a warm-up, where this is very, very hard, kicking hard here, and you're going into an almost sprint when you transition from it, and then winding it down towards the end. There's plenty of different ways of doing it. You don't have to do it with fins, although unless you're an exceptional kicker, then it is much more effective using fins. But it is useful to do it without fins sometimes in order to get a feel for what your kicking feels like without that extra pressure of fins. So, hope you've enjoyed this video, hope it makes sense, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers!